Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Ross. I'm a research associate with the Soil Carbon Solutions Center. I recently graduated with my master's in greenhouse gas management and sustainable food systems. And I also grew up in Southwest Iowa on my family's farm, where I was introduced to responsible land stewardship from a very young age. And that has definitely shaped me into the person I am today. Very passionate about sustainable agriculture. CSU Soil Carbon Solutions Center was founded in 2022 and leverages world-class expertise to build the tools needed to accelerate the deployment of credible soil-based climate solutions, measure their impact, and also bring them to scale. The center has over 50 active members, and our team is rapidly growing. And before we introduce our presenters, it's important to us that we acknowledge that carbon markets may not be accessible or feasible for everyone. And in this webinar, we'll explore, or our last webinar, we'll explore some creative alternatives and discuss emerging opportunities, equity, access as well. And we also have one more webinar after this one, and they all use the same Zoom link, and we hope you can join us. But if not, they'll all be recorded, and that recording will be sent out to everyone who's registered.
Thanks, Christine. And then this is just a snapshot. This is actually from a couple weeks ago. We've had registration since then, but just wanted to illuminate who's in the room. And so about 30% of registrants are producers. And then we also have folks from nonprofits, business folks like from carbon development projects and others. So we're excited to have all of you here, researchers as well, and welcome everyone and the angle that you bring to this conversation. So today we will, like I said, it's 90 minutes. First, we'll hear from the Indrelands about their ranch and their experience in a carbon development project. And then we'll have a little break and we'll hear from Chris Mehus about his work. And then we'll do Q&A, like I said, at the end. So feel free to drop questions in the chat. We will be tracking those. And so I'd like to introduce our speakers today, Betsy and Roger Indreland. They're owner-operators at Indreland Ranch in Montana. And then their neighbor, Chris Mehus, will speak after them. And he's the executive director at Western Sustainability Exchange. We're so glad to have them here. Thank you all for speaking today. And with that, I will pass it to Betsy and Roger. I will stop sharing my screen, Betsy, so that you can share yours.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. I'll get my screen shared here. Okay. Where is it here? Sorry. Oh, there it is. Sorry. This is not my forte. Can everybody see that? Okay.
You could shrink that a little bit.
Yes.
Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yep. Looks
good.
good. Yes.
Okay. All right. Sounds great. Roger, I'll let you introduce us a little bit. And I realized I opened the wrong one. So why don't you, because I closed it before. So go ahead and
Okay. Yes. Well, thanks everybody who's online. Appreciate your interest. I'm Roger Indreland and my wife Betsy. We ranch north of Big Timber, Montana, it's about 80 miles west of Billings and about 60 to 70 miles east of Bozeman, kind of directly north of Yellowstone Park. So a beautiful area. We have been experiencing a lot of population growth, a lot of new folks coming in and things like that. We're also in a Western Sustainability Exchange based out of Livingston. Has had an impact on the landscape around here in a pretty substantial way with regenerative practices and education and those sort of things throughout for quite a long time, well over or right at 30 years. So involved with the board for WSE, and so we are a registered Angus seed stock producer. And which means we sell bulls to commercial producers for breeding their cows to provide calves for them to market, and whether they're doing a yearling operation or a cow calf operation or some sort of all the way to beef operation. But anyway, So we're doing a way different kind of seed stock operation based on forage only, a moderate kind of cow that can get the job done. But anyway, so along the lines with our involvement with Western Sustainability Exchange, we did,
Those are the prizes I got up now. Sorry.
yeah, so we got involved in the carbon market. But Betsy, if you've got your slides up now, you
Yeah,
can
sorry about
move
that.
along in a little more organized fashion.
So we thought we'd just give you a brief glimpse at our ranch and how we arrived at being involved in a carbon project, but just a little bit about us. This is our family. Our one daughter's in Texas in the cutting horse industry, and our other daughter is in the military. She and her husband are both in the Army. So our mission is to provide genetics and services that help cattle producers attain more freedom and profitability in their business and life. And that means having low input cattle that give you time to do the things you want to do beyond ranching. And our vision statement is, I'll just read it, I guess, quickly. Indreland Ranch is holistically managed and operated to produce healthy nutrition and environment for people, livestock, and wildlife. This is accomplished by resilience to economic and environmental factors and by providing opportunities and profit for all involved. It is managed and operated by a team of motivated, goal-oriented, and open-minded individuals that work together in a respectful manner. And our enterprises bulls that Roger talked about briefly, cow-calf operation. We've had a small beef business, which is, we've just kind of realized our time is better spent elsewhere, and that's gotten a lot more competitive. So we've kind of backed off on that. We have some worms and a vermicast operation that's really neglected, but there's a lot of potential there. We have some milk cows. So raw milk could be a potential enterprise, and chickens, eggs, that sort of thing. How our regenerative journey started, we attended the Ranching for Profit School in 2012, and we went again in 2018. But in 2013, through the Ranching for Profit Network, we attended a workshop by Nicole Masters, and that changed our life. We didn't realize what was underneath the soil and what potential there was there, and that just opened up a whole new world for us. Through that, our desired outcomes that we're trying to achieve by doing, different practices with grazing and all that are better water and infiltration, increased water quality, just achieving a cooler landscape, ultimately increasing food quality, more nutrient dense food, which of course, ties to human health, lowering our input costs to increase our profitability, reduce stress on people and animals. And then what we're all here for today is carbon sequestration, increasing organic matter in our soil, which is, of course, water holding capacity. Then just a little slide I put in there. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So mindset is huge in doing things regeneratively and a little bit different than maybe some of your neighbors. So, and then I just have a picture in here of some winter grazing that we were doing. You can see that, where the grass is or forage is shorter versus not. We had a fence there and we had just taken it down because the cattle had to come back for water. But just, I don't know if you want to talk about that. Okay, no, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is just an example of some winter grazing, and I think we'll kind of get through the slides, but then just wants to just kind of verifies that we've tried lots of things and done quite a few different things, and then we'll start diving in pretty deep as to why we're doing what we're doing. So
yeah, I had to throw a bull video in here just because, I guess. So the top one is an 18-month-old bull, and then the next slide is that same bull a couple years later, grown up. So I just had to throw one of those in there. So
well, that goes. I mean, all that is saying is that the cattle mature slower when they're on a forage-based diet as they're growing, and they're, the longevity and all the good things are retained. We're not shortening their lifespan, and they're growing and developing naturally. And so, just to point that out.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all the slides we had, and now we can get into a deeper dive into why we're doing what we're doing, I guess,
Mhm.
how we got involved in the carbon project. I guess, since we were focusing on soil health and how it impacted us being able to grow grass and, run more cattle, those kinds of things. Through WSC, we got introduced to some people that were working on a grassland carbon project, the first of its kind in the US, I guess. Anyway, so it really only made sense that I mean, we were doing those things and getting great results for the ranch, why not be able to sequester, measure that carbon that's sequestered um and make some money there too. So it just made sense, and it all kind of fell into line.
That's
So,
right. And, I mean, so in 2011, we averaged 21 acres per animal unit with all of our livestock adjusted to 1,000 pounds. And in 2022, we averaged 14. And we had a lot more stockpile forage in front of us in 2022. So that's a huge increase in production ability, which ties back to water holding capacity, organic matter, carbon, um, being able to capture sunlight and use sunlight, and having plant density were better. But really, the focus for us leading up to being involved with the carbon project was organic matter. And so it's really organic matter and carbon. It's not a completely parallel line but if you increase organic matter and continue to increase organic matter on an ongoing basis, you will start to sequester more carbon, and you'll sequester more carbon deeper over time. And at least that's completely my understanding. I think most everybody agrees with that real basic premise of that's kind of how it works. But then the idea, so that's backed up by increase in forage production and water retention and all those things, and nutrient density in the soil profile because of the organic matter as well. But then we come along, WSC, we've been involved with Western Sustainability Exchange, and they're had been approached to do a carbon project, a pilot project, needed volunteers, looking for volunteers. Early on, there was some kind of meetings like, well, what about this? Who's interested? What is the level of interest? And, that was a struggle to get 10 people in a room. And then here we are today, and I don't know how many are on here exactly, but there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of publicity about carbon markets and carbon sequestration. And so the interest has perked. But some of the things that really there's some big questions when you have them initial meetings and initial contacts with people that you might be having an ongoing relationship with. And a lot of it kind of depends on your mindset, because at least in our case, and I think it's even true to this today to some case, because there's a lot of different options out there, and sorting through their true intentions and what's behind that and everything is, I think, pretty important, in making sure that you're comfortable with that, because carbon it's not something that you just sign up for a year. It's an ongoing process. It's a commitment to management, and it is on management. I mean, different landowners, we lease quite a bit of ground, so we've had to, get buy-in from those landowners, and then the next question that comes up is what happens if that landowner decides to sell their place and you no longer have management of that land, and is that going to be a penalty in the scope of your contract for carbon? So there's a lot of those kind of questions. And then back to the mindset, you know, we were kind of had the perspective of that this is kind of a new thing. And so somebody has to put their best intentions forward. And we kind of have mindset that as long as we have um, partners that are trustworthy, and we've had that discussion about um, commitment to a long-term project as to how it's going to develop and committing to working through the ups and downs. There's really nothing wrong with being a guinea pig, if you will, from that perspective. But it really is based on trust, and with the partners involved, all the way from us to the landowners that we're working with, that we lease land from. And part of that, to me, a lot of that is kind of tied to, you know, I think this program with WSE's involvement, Western Sustainability Exchange and Native Energy are in a partnership of sorts that there's not really a great big agenda. They're not great big companies. You can know um, the CEOs, and you can know the owners, and I think that lends towards a high level of trust. And so I think those kind of things uh, really come into play, and it also depends on your financial need, because there were some people in the room in the first meeting or two who were you know, third to fifth generation ranchers that are as far as I know, I have not seen their financials, but by by all indications, they don't have a lot of incentive. You know, that they have incentive to maybe change their management and do things, but to risk signing a carbon contract for 20 to 30 years at the same, you know, they're going to really think hard about that. That's a commitment that they're maybe don't have to do, or don't see a huge reason to do, and especially when they put that along with the risks of being kind of a new field of how we're going to do this and how we're going to develop that. Um, but you know, I guess we weren't quite that on that kind of solid footing, so we felt the risk was worth taking. So with that in mind, we signed up for the long haul and committed to working through the ins and outs of you know what all the grazing reports need to be and this and that, one thing or another. But um, it was because of that trust because of the conversation that we had early on about what's trust, how much is this, how much trust is there, and what is the level of commitment from all parties for the long haul. So anyway, I think that's a lot of what really sorts that out. And we also realized that we weren't comparing at that time. There wasn't options. I mean, there really weren't a lot of carbon options. So if you wanted to experiment and kind of be at the forefront of that, I think you just kind of needed to make that leap of faith. I don't know what else do you have, Betsy. I mean, there is a lot of questions about carbon in and of itself. And, you know, I always really think of it as um, organic matter, and I tie into that parallel. That's pretty parallel anyway. So if we're increasing organic matter, we're increasing the value of our production system.
And I'm sure you touched on it, Raj, but you know, if you're looking at doing it and you're just doing conventional grazing, you really do have to be willing to change your management and um, graze in a different way. And it's definitely going to take time, labor, effort, kind of a paradigm shift. But that will get the carbon in the ground versus set stock grazing, which actually maybe is going the other way. So there's most ranchers are doing a great job because they're taking care of the resource. But there are situations where it is going the other way. So, and those might be the people who somewhat are interested for a financial
Right.
reason, but you really do have to be ready to change what you're doing, how you're doing your grazing.
Yeah, and I think also it probably isn't very realistic to change a complete operation if the only incentive is the carbon credit. I think you need to probably be thinking about a different kind of grazing, or at least be have sampled a little bit of that, and then by sampling a little bit of that, it won't be long into some sort of an adaptive grazing management program that you'll have a list of wants. That list of wants is further water development a lot of times. Could be more fencing, whatever it is, it could be more labor, all those things that some extra funds would certainly be valuable for. And so I think just looking for what is the biggest opportunity, or what's kind of the low hanging fruit in that situation. There's also, as we move down the road, they're talking about who's doing the data collection and who's proving up on this and who's verifying it, which to us was critical. We wanted to be part of a protocol that was set forth could be replicated, but also could be backed up with the data. We weren't in a position to try to collect any of that data on our own. That our data, we have access to our data, but we really didn't. It really takes a team to collect that data and go through the process of getting verification done on these kind of projects, so it is a real market. I mean, that's the critical thing. We could have somebody just offer us money for carbon credits. It could be even a one-off. If they just needed to put something on a package and be able to, but sooner or later somebody's going to ask the question, well, what's behind that? How are you backing that up? And so that was very, very important thing for us, that it was verified and that there was commitment to going through that process, not knowing if it was going to take 6 months or more like about 5 years, like it kind of has. I mean, it is a process. So, and other thing was we didn't have there was not the initial contract, for instance. You get presented a contract and you need to read every bit of it. You need to read it thoroughly through and analyze and look at how that may or may not affect you. The initial contract we were presented was not acceptable. And so we wanted this to be a carbon project, and we wanted the contract to reflect that it was only a carbon project. So all of the potential ecological benefits aren't part of the contract. So in other words, if we increase bird habitat because of our grazing, or if we increase diversity of plant species because of our grazing and all those kind of things, those other ecosystem services kinds of things that we felt we wanted to retain or separate that and have those things a separate thing. So maybe ecological services down the road is something we market, but we didn't want it to all get tied up in that contract. So I would be careful, make sure you read it and make sure that you fully understand it, because you could easily sign up for more than you bargained for, or and you would no longer own it or have a good vested interest in it, as far as marketing about it. So those things, as well as what is the potential future market? What is the potential of the future carbon market? And it looks like it's kind of on the upswing pretty good right now. And you want to be with a company, there needs to be language in that if since you're in it for a long time, you need to have the option to buy that out if the value is there, and they need the option to meet that. So those kind of terms are really, really, to me, just being completely upfront about everything, being completely open about what you want and what you need, and then seeing if what the proposal is meets those parameters. And if it doesn't, ask the question, because that's the only way you'll really get to the bottom of it. And through that process, we did develop a real trust. But I also think tying that back together, where we basically have a nonprofit in WSE and another privately held company, but not a monster global company. I think it's easier to develop that trust. So that's our perspective on that.
The things with the soil sampling that I think varies from company to company is the depth at which they're sampling, and depending what scientist you talk to, what the proper depth is. So I don't think across the board they've reached agreement on that. So that's something that might differ between companies. So, depending, I guess, what you're aligned with might make a difference. But I think as long as it's consistent on your place, throughout the project, it would be fine. But some think it should be deeper, some less deep. So that was
Roger
the
and
difference.
Betsy,
And that,
could I ask
Yes.
you, could you guys talk a little bit about your costs of implementing the new grazing practices and your
Sure.
like pre-existing infrastructure, your fencing and water access that kind of supported that transition?
yeah, so we'd been doing quite a substantial amount of temporary polywire fencing, which is relatively cheap. I mean, but it's still going to be, by the time you include a good energizer and stuff, you're still going to be looking at a couple $1,000s per mile. That is fence you can reuse for the most part, and so you can use that wherever you want to. But then when it gets to installing, at least a semi-permanent or permanent electric fence, the cost is still cheaper than, at least with electric, it's cheaper than a traditional fence, and it's going to be in the range of $3,000 to $4,000 per mile. At least that's our pricing here. But what's not accounted into that is the labor, and especially in the fence that you're moving all the time. That labor is a real component, and that labor does add up. And actually, we have been utilizing Quivera's new agrarian program for a lot for that purpose over the past 4 years. So that's been a fantastic option for us. To have young, excited, passionate people helping to do some of that labor. So, or actually most of it. But probably the bigger cost is if it's water development. Water development, it's really easy to get just to convert a well from an existing well to a solar, or from an existing generator to a solar, can be $15,000 per well. That does not include the cost of a well. And depending on your situation, where water is, or where you're at, and what your water depth is, boy, those costs can vary. But developing water can get really expensive really fast. It's not at all unusual to spend $100,000 to drill a well and develop that water and get maybe a mile or two of pipeline installed. And that would actually be on the economical side. If you were doing it on a bigger scale and had to take water 5 to 10 miles and needed a 20-gallon a minute well or something pretty substantial, that could easily get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, as well as I mean, you may need water storage. You may have a well that produces enough water, but it doesn't produce enough all at once. So storage is also a very, very expensive option. And in our area, wintertime storage is problematic. It's just difficult. It almost has to be buried. And, the excavation for that and all those things can be quite costly. So there again, going back to your planning and thoughts about your landscape is, I really recommend picking the low-hanging fruit and expand from there. The projects that seem pretty doable, because there's almost never an end to how many you could think about doing. And also in our case is with leased properties, there's sometimes a limit. Well, how much money do you really want to put into a leased property? So you got to balance that off as well. Kind of make sure that you have commitment from your landowners and those kind of things. So,
Did you talk about how that we got money up front to do some of those things?
I have not.
Let me do that. Okay.
And that was a big attraction to the program.
So the program we're a part of had monies up front. They called it the Help Build program, knowing that to do these grazing practices, they needed to help you pay for water infrastructure, so you could have other grazing areas. So we got money up front to do water improvement projects, and then they called it the Help Build program, and maybe Chris will talk about this more too. But then we were able to, install those and then do the grazing, and we're basically paying it back with the carbon we're sequestering as time goes. So it was kind of money up front sort of a deal so that we could afford to do those projects. Did that answer your question, Chris?
Yes, that was great.
I think one other thing that's just important to understand is carbon can come and go. So it's not like there's an absolute recipe that is absolutely defined. Like if you graze X, Y, and Z, it's not completely an exacting science. And so it's certainly going to change the trend, and you're going to start to sequester carbon. But the key is, you can't just graze a pasture for 2 years and think that you've sequestered all the carbon you're going to sequester and you're done with it. Because to continue to drive that carbon down, you need to continue the practices. That's my understanding. And I think that is, I don't think there's even too much argument amongst hardly anybody about that. There could be a fire come through. There's things, who knows what can happen that takes you back 2 to 3 years. So to me, the key is the commitment to the long-term benefits. And the long-term to me is the ultimate carbon sequestered deep underground where it's actually sequestered. The shorter term benefits, and part of the reason for doing it is improvement you'll see in pasture conditions and livestock and forage production, because you're lifting all things. You're lifting diversity, forage quality, plant diversity, wildlife diversity, and adding species, and it's just lifting everything. And so I think that's the mindset. So I look at it as a total and complete management system, not just it's not a carbon grazing plan in my mind. In my mind, it's a system we're implementing for many, many reasons.
We used up all our time too. So
Meg, that was a great place to end that for now. I'm sure you all will come back in for Q&A and maybe during Chris's presentation. But for now, we're going to do a little 5-minute break. So if you all just want to go and get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, and we'll meet back here. What time is it now? At 11:43. Thanks so much, Betsy and Roger. And then we'll hear from Chris next, and then we'll do a Q&A. So don't go away, folks. We're going to hear from Chris Mehus next. Take it away,
So-
Chris.
Yes, thank you. My name is Chris Mehus, and I am the recently crowned, I guess, Executive Director of the Western Sustainability Exchange. Our founder, Lil Exon, is working on a retirement project for herself. And so she's going to be staying on staff and remaining here to help us with our ecosystem services program, but she's scaling back. So I took the reins in January and am really excited for opportunities like this to share what we're doing. I'll apologize ahead of time. My voice may crack a bit. I'm battling some different things right now. So if I completely fail, Roger said and Betsy said they'd bail me out. So I'll get through it as best I can here. Anyway, I wanted to start mine off just answering a couple of really quick questions that were in the chat. And so there was a question about the management practices. And so I will get into that more with my slides. We've got about a dozen people in the program now that are actually enrolled, another 2 or 3 dozen that are signed up and working through various stages of the onboarding and contracting process. So I can talk to you more about collectively what some of their experiences are with changing their grazing management up. And there was a question about the payments. And so as Roger and Betsy alluded to, Native and the program that they're involved with does have a help build program. And so that is an opportunity for you to get paid some of your future earnings and carbon credits up front. So it's not a loan, it's really an advance payment on what you're going to earn in the carbon contract. So when you sign that contract, it's for a 30-year period. That's just changed recently. Now, Roger and Betsy are in a 30-year commitment, but because of the verification body, Vera, because of some of their rules, Native has moved that up to a 40-year commitment. So now it's a 40-year contract. But anyway, it is a long-term commitment, and the way those payments are structured, at least for the Indreland Ranch and the ones that do help build, you get advanced some of that money up front. It's not your whole budget. You're required to put in some cost share yourself. There's NRCS equip. There's in our area, the Audubon's got some programs. The Nature Conservancy's got programs. World Wildlife Fund has got a program. So there are other sources of funding to help. And really, you can't have enough money to build out water infrastructure and fence and labor. There's just so many things you can do to enhance those things that the sky really is kind of the limit as to what you can spend on infrastructure. So on average, we're still learning what the rate is per acre, but it's somewhere between $3 to $5 an acre is what Roger and Betsy are earning each year in carbon credits. And then there was a question about state and federal land, and that depends on the company that you enroll with. Some allow leased land and others don't. Others are all on deeded land. This particular project that Roger and Betsy are in does allow for leased land, whether it's private or state or federal. Any and all of that land is eligible as long as the landowner is aware of that and is okay with you making the changes to the land. So with that, I'll just launch into this. I think it's really important for context. And Roger and Betsy talked about your mindset and where you're at in your paradigm to understand if you're really ready for a program like this, because it does require significant change and it does require a big commitment. And so to define regenerative grazing, it's basically managing that grazing animal, that cow, that sheep, that horse, that bison, whatever it is, so that it's a fully beneficial and contributing member of its surrounding ecosystem. And everyone's done, as Betsy said, if you weren't a steward of the land, you wouldn't be on it. People that are abusing the land will not stay in business very long. And so I'm a firm believer in the fact that ranchers aren't out there damaging the land on purpose, but we really have to look at the land as a resource and as an ecosystem and really manage the grass and the plants and the animals in that ecosystem so that our practices are mutually beneficial to the ecosystem. And so that's kind of that paradigm shift, I think, that Betsy was talking about. And so the regenerative part is really helping to regenerate or rebuild these natural systems that are traditional practices, conventional practices have not helped. And so there's just a really quick photo to show you that we can do a better job. This is two sides of a county road, same soil, same water, same really everything when it comes to all the environmental variables, but very different management, as you can see. This is after a few years of drought. So, you know, not to make excuses for anyone, but, you know, this was after a couple of really bad years. But you can see the one on the right photo there is a holistically managed ranch. They went through holistic management classes in the 90s at the previous generation. The son is now taking over the operation, and he's also committed to managing holistically. You can see that riparian area is much more resilient than the one just across the county road and the left photo. So we can do a better job, as Roger alluded to, and we can grow more grass. So there's a real economic benefit and motivator here too. And the problems that the reason that we're in the situation that we're in is because of overgrazing, and it's also because of undergrazing. And those two things can happen in one pasture. So this is a photo I took, it's in the springtime, and you can see in this pasture that there's a lot of plants there that haven't been used in years. And there's a lot of plants there that get grazed down right to their roots every year. And so the management change that Roger and Betsy have adopted on their ranch is to make sure that their animals can't be selective when they're grazing. So you don't end up with a situation like this where you've got a whole bunch of plants that aren't grazed at all, and then all the rest of the plants that are grazed right into the dirt. That requires a lot of infrastructure, that requires extra labor, but that requires that commitment and mindset. And so this is another picture to just illustrate, if you zoom in on one of those plants that has not been grazed, you can see here that in the springtime, the only green on this plant that's taking up most of this photo, and I apologize if you can't see it very well, but the only green is really on the outer rim of that plant. So this plant has basically died from the inside out due to underuse. And so overgrazing is a problem and undergrazing is a problem. And so this diagram we borrowed from some of our friends out in the Midwest, and I can't think of the name of the organization yet, but I've seen this image used over and over, and we did ask permission, but I think it's a really great illustration of how to compare continuous grazing on the left, typical rotational grazing in the center, to really more of an adaptive and an aggressive management schedule over on the right. And so you can see, just kind of starting at the top of the photo there, resting versus grazing in those three scenarios varies quite a bit. So if you have, Betsy mentioned continuous set stock grazing. So if animals are in the pasture all year or for a month or two, that continuous grazing, basically the plants that the animals are selecting for don't get any rest through the entire growing season. They're getting grazed and regrazed week after week. In the center scenario, once you start splitting your pastures up, getting enough water available, you're able to rest more pastures for longer periods of time. And then your grazing takes place for a shorter period of time. So you're concentrating that animal activity. And when you do that, the pastures that you're not in at any point in time are receiving that rest. And then under the adaptive grazing scenario, where you've got many small pastures and animals are really concentrated in those pastures, then you've got much more of your property that is able to rest. The other thing that's happening there is the utilization of the plants is much more uniform. So you don't have the animals able to go out there and graze whatever they want, whenever they want. So really just a few general rules of thumb for regenerative grazing is that you're wanting to promote that non-selective grazing. And as Roger mentioned, and I'll brag on them for a little bit, they're producing animals that can do better under these conditions. Those animals they're a smaller frame, they're a more efficient animal. And so the generalization I like to make is typically if you've got a 1,700 pound cow, or even if she's 1,400 pounds, she might not do well under this scenario. Most of the cows that are that size need a lot more pampering in order to produce a calf every year, in order to breed back. And so that non-selective grazing does take a specific kind of animal. You might not be able to do that with the animal that you have right now. The second really important principle is to avoid the second bite. And so all the plants that I've had in my photos so far, almost all grasses on Western rangelands require grazing to stay healthy. And if you think about the herds of bison and elk and deer that roamed wild and were managed by predators, they basically grazed an area down until there was no forage left, and then they moved on. Because if they strayed from the herd, they got eaten. And so they stayed in really tight groups and they moved together. And so that's the kind of management that's the kind of activity that we're trying to emulate with our management. And what that means is when a plant gets grazed in a pasture, hopefully all of them get grazed or all of them get impacted in some way. Some people say graze a third, trample a third, and soil a third, or defecate or urinate on a third of the plants. But when you leave a pasture, you want to see that every plant has been impacted, hopefully. But then you don't want to be in there a week or 10 days later when those plants start to regrow. When a plant gets grazed, it first uses its root reserves to start growing back. Once it's done that, then you want the plant to be able to grow and flourish. It won't be able to give energy back to its roots until it's fully grown back. And then, of course, the most important thing is allowing that adequate recovery once the plant has been grazed. So just to reiterate a few things here in terms of management, non-selective grazing is very important. When you have animals managed in this way, you start to see things happen with their behavior and how they act around one another. And so the way I like to describe that is it's like a bunch of hunters at Cabela's when there's a sale on bullets or something that they're fishermen with lures. When the cows go into that pasture, they are competing with one another. They're throwing elbows. They're pushing each other around. They are urgently trying to get to those plants. And so that herd instinct is a really powerful thing. The behavior that those animals exhibit is very different than most other animals that you observe. And then, of course, the rest. And so one of the important things about rest is you want to really vary your season of use. So you want to be in pastures at different times each year. And in order to do that, that requires some flexibility in your grazing system. I mean, most people have a calving pasture, and it's not easy when you have babies on mothers to move those cows halfway across the ranch so you can get to the pasture you want to get to when at that right time of year. Usually you go into the same pasture, you pair out coming out of the calving pasture into the next one adjacent. And so that requires some flexibility of, maybe you calve during a later time in the year so that you don't have to calve in the same pasture every year by the buildings. And then the second thing, I already mentioned this, but you want to impact every plant. So when you leave that pasture, you want to see that plants have either been grazed, trampled, or soiled. And then the other really important thing here is to consider your carrying capacity. And so what happens to a lot of people is they hear somebody like Roger who just said in the last half hour, you're going to grow more grass and you're going to have more productive plants, and there's going to be more of those plants. And so a lot of people will start adding to their stocking rate before they've honored that rest. And so understanding your carrying capacity for each pasture and adjusting your management to that is incredibly important. And then the other thing that kind of goes along with that is, really monitoring body condition and being very proactive about your management. And so looking at number 2 there, if you want to impact every plant, you want to do that. That needs to be at the top of your mind when you're making management decisions. But you also don't want to drive your animals to the point where they're suffering. So if you don't have the right genetics yet, and you're working your way toward that, you need to really honor body condition as a priority when you're making your management decisions, because if you only manage for the plant and the soil, then you're going to end up with a whole bunch of opens every year. And so I put this diagram together just to kind of show the flow of money through our carbon system. And most of the different models that are out there are pretty similar, but basically starting on the left-hand side, somebody replaced an image that I had in there. So that's supposed to be a conference room table. I think it kind of looks like a spaceship, but that little black image is a conference room table. So that's a company deciding if they want to enter a carbon market or not. And so basically what you have is this little guy here with the sad face. He's feeling guilty about his carbon footprint. He wants to market to his consumers that he's better than the next company. And so he's going to do something about that. Most of the companies that we work with do a lot of stuff internally first. So they've adopted sustainable practices. They're committed to doing everything they can internally, but no one can do everything internally to erase their carbon footprint. And so that's where this carbon credit motivation comes in. So then you've got the dollars there that they want to commit to sequestering carbon in some way. That's an offset. You guys have heard about that in the previous conversations, I think. And so together, Native Energy, Native Now, and us put together a project. So we sit down with Roger and Betsy, we look at their operation and we say, what can we do to improve your management? What things do you see as opportunities? What's the low-hanging fruit? How do we make improvements to your system so that you can sequester more carbon and benefit from a market like this? So when we put that project together, then it combines the rancher's ingenuity with money. And that diagram there on the lower right corner is basically going from 1 pasture to 9 pastures. So mostly what we're talking about is more animals on smaller units of land for shorter periods of time is what results in greater periods of rest. And it's unfortunate that we always talk about the animals and the management, because rest is what allows the plants to grow more per plant. It also allows more plants to be out there on the landscape, so you're filling up the bare ground. And it results in all that greater productivity and more cover on the ground, which then benefits this soil ecosystem that is what's sequestering the carbon. So all that life in the soil, that life both above ground and below ground, results in the center of the photo there, stored carbon. That carbon is coming out of the atmosphere and being sequestered in the ground. And then from the stored carbon over to the original consumer of the credits, there's that little coinage there that's documented. And so every 5 to 7 years, that was another question in the chat, every 5 to 7 years, we go back and measure the amount of carbon in the soil to see what kind of change there's been over time. And so that's my last slide, and I think I'm at time. Hopefully I went quickly enough, and I think we're to the Q&A.
Thank you, Chris. And then I also just wanted to ask you, since we're really hoping to hammer home, you know, what is it that folks who are here should be thinking about before signing on a contract? What do you think, Chris, is like, what do you think is the most important, or what have you noticed with the producers that you work with is really important to them?
You know, I have to say I've been kind of surprised in how concerned ranchers are about who's holding the pen on the other side, writing the check for their carbon credits. I figured that wouldn't be that important as long as the company representing those credits was trustworthy, and as long as the money was to be used in ways that benefit their grazing system. I didn't think it would be that important who was purchasing the credits, but it is. No one has come into the program and not asked that question almost right off the bat. Like, who's buying the credits? Who am I working with here? And so I think it's really important that the people on the company side that are purchasing the credits are as committed to improving the environment as you are as a rancher. And Roger and Betsy didn't mention it, but they have sponsored 2 different field days. One when we started the project 4 years ago, and then another one last summer, where the companies that are buying the credits are invited to come out and do a pasture walk with the ranchers that are in the program. And the interaction there, the sharing that goes back and forth, the relationship building is really cool. So, you know, Native sits in the middle as the project developer. And so it is an arm's length, like, you know, Xanterra Parks and Resorts locally is one of the companies that purchases credits from the Native program. They don't buy credits directly from the Indreland Ranch. Their Roger and Betsy's credits get bundled with a whole bunch of other ranches that are in the program, and then they get put into a portfolio or a package, or kind of like a mutual fund, I guess. And then the companies are purchasing shares or interest or credits in that mutual fund, if you will. So anyway, I went down that rabbit trail a little too far, but ranchers really care about who is buying the credits. The other thing that I think most people aren't aware of is the verification process. So how are your credits being vetted and verified, and who's doing that? So some of that has to do with the measurement, but a lot of companies also use a model to help estimate those credits in between measurement periods. And so there's several bodies out there, international independent bodies that verify carbon credits. It's important who does that and how those credits are verified, and that leads to the quality of your credits. Right now, these grazing credits are very new, and so it isn't a real competitive marketplace for which credits are worth more than others. But I suspect in 5 years, credits that are very well vetted, and there's a lot of really good documentation, and you can get to know the ranchers, and the ranchers can know the companies. I think systems like that are very transparent and have a lot of good checks and balances and good documentation are going to be worth more than those that aren't. And then the other thing, like Roger said, I'll just reiterate, the terms of the contract are so important. Really read that carefully, get to know the company who's behind the contract and how long they've been in business, how much they know about these things, what their experience is, what models they use, what science they are tapping into. All those things are really important credits, I think, are really important questions to ask to know if you're in a good program or not.
Thanks, Chris. One question that I know came up was the cost of soil sampling, and I think adding the frequency of soil sampling. If Betsy, Roger, or Chris, if you guys want to talk about, yeah, the frequency of soil sampling and who pays that cost.
Yeah, I can hit that one really quick. They will resample
better.
every 5 to 7 years. They will resample. We didn't have anybody to do that our first year, and so we just raised our hand and said, well, we'll figure it out. And so we hired some college students to go out in the field, and we worked with Montana State University and the soils department there. And so we did the sampling ourselves, and we sent that into a local lab and had it analyzed. And those samples, the remnants of those samples are all stored in a storage unit, temperature controlled storage unit, so they could be redone if they need to be. And the rancher in the native program at least doesn't pay for that. And so that $3 to $7 per acre per year that the rancher is earning is their money after all the costs. And so that's another really important question to ask, is who's doing the sampling and who's paying for it? Because some of the carbon companies out there will require you to verify your own credits. They're just brokers, essentially. They're just putting buyers and sellers together. And, this is a deep enough pool right now that jumping into it's pretty intimidating. And so that's the other thing I'll say about the native program, is they've tried to de-risk as much of that as possible for the ranchers. And so the level to which the company you're working with is taking the risk on themselves is very important, because ranchers have enough work to do out there on the ground. They don't need to be worrying about verifying their carbon credits.
And just the question came in related to that topic about the difference with the different labs. In your experience, have there been a lot of differences in the soil sample results that come back from the different labs?
That's not my department, so I really don't know that, but I don't think so. We use the combustion method in order to separate the soil carbon from all the other mineral soil. And I think that's pretty well accepted as the way to do that. And so I don't think that there would be much difference once you've, burned all the carbon off and taken weight. I don't think there would be much difference between laboratories, but I'm completely speaking out of school there, just giving you my opinion about that. So.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Okay. We had some questions about land tenure, and I think Betsy and Roger, you lease land that you also sell carbon credits on. And feel free, Chris, to talk as well. But could you talk a little bit about land tenure and how that plays into saying yes or no to a carbon credit project? And also we had a question about state land or BLM land, and I don't know if Chris or Roger, Betsy, you know anything about that?
Yeah, we have a quite a variety in landlords that we lease properties from, and so we've had those discussions. There are some that didn't want to be part of that, or we felt it was not a secure enough relationship to include. But if you have a secure relationship and you can have an open conversation with your landlord, the emphasis is the management. So that, you know, what they need to understand is that and this could go, I mean, we could have an hour-long discussion on this, but the bottom line is we have communicated with those landlords that our management is what is increasing, productivity and sequestering carbon. So we feel as a leasee that we should be the beneficiary of that.
They're benefiting in the improvement in the land.
That's right. I mean, they get kind of the ecosystem services for free, if you will, but this, as far as the carbon contract, the funds come to us, and but it gives us incentive to pay more attention to that lease as well. But it is communicating that so that there's an understanding that if they sold the land or wanted to select a different leasee, that they want to and they want to continue that project, they would need to select a leasee that could continue the management that we're doing. So that gives them the option. And in our situation, if a land sells, it has to, those acres have to get excluded if it's not under the program anymore. Then they get excluded from our contract. But I guess backing up a little, one other note I had just wanted to say, because it might be a question in some people's mind, is for the most part, the projects that are selected to do and the scope of the work where the need is primarily determined by the landowner and the operator, the manager. It's not like this is a list of selected things that you need to pick from. So whatever your specific situation requires, the way when we signed up, the opportunity then was for us to make the request of what we thought was necessary. And then that gets sorted through and make sure it aligns. But it's not like this is some predetermined list of, well, you can do this, but not this. So it's really not a prescription. And which doesn't work with grazing anyway. It has to be a case by case solution.
And them being part of the project, it's not binding. So they can sell the land, and we could sell our land too. So it's just just for us. It's not binding upon the new owner.
Right. But it is listed. There is a document that goes to the courthouse to know that there is a carbon contract on that land.
Yeah, it's just kind of a notification.
And I think that would probably vary state by state, but at least in Montana, that's the way to go about that.
And we do know, and Chris could probably talk about this, that there are some people with BLM leases that are involved in the carbon project. We do have a state lease, which is part of that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and that can be an issue. I think I mentioned it, but I can go down that path a little bit farther. So most of the ranchers in our project have some state and or BLM. A few of the ranchers, I think Bill Milton was on your program last week. Over half of his ranch is BLM, but there needs to be a very trusting relationship there between the BLM office and the rancher, because we do have ranchers that have entered the program and haven't been able to make as significant of changes to their grazing system as Bill, because they don't have that trusting relationship. So you're getting paid for improvements to your management. If you can't make significant changes, then you're not going to be able to make as much improvement to your plants or your soil. So that relationship is really key. And not all carbon programs will allow you to include leased land.
Thanks, Chris. So there's two kind of connected questions that are gonna zoom out a little bit. Can you all talk about the good juju, as was put in the chat, that has allowed all this success to happen in Montana with Western Sustainability Exchange and Indrelands? And also, connected question, if this carbon project had shown up 15 or 10 years ago, would we have seen the same kind of farmer adoption?
For our area, we really live in a unique area, I believe. There's a lot of our neighbors who either have been through the ranching for profit curriculum or holistic management. So I feel really blessed in our area that there's a lot of open-minded, forward-thinking ranchers that have adopted not only those kinds of practices, either, through economically or ecologically, but like also a lot of low stress livestock handling. So it's just a lot of really forward thinking people here. And I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the crazy mountains or something, but I feel really blessed that our local community is like that. And I'm not sure why, but so given that they are kind of open-minded, so they were really welcoming of thinking about this carbon project. There's I think 3 of us original people are right in this neighborhood. So yeah, I think we're just really fortunate for whatever reason.
And yeah, and I also believe that, 10 to 15 years ago, just the amount of that carbon has been in the news, all those things, I think that all just adds up over time. And then you combine that with the economics of, um, let's see, traditional or mainstream ranching. And, the economics are not necessarily getting better. So I think you combine those things and there's more incentive. There's also probably more people owning land in our area that have the freedom to do what they want with that land. They may not be a family making a living on that land other than us because we're leasing it. So with that in mind, I mean, I think there's some flexibility and an openness in mindset from that perspective as well.
Awareness of soil health more than it used to be. And you can't pick up a magazine that it doesn't have something about soil health. So I think that awareness and how organic matter parallels carbon, I think people are understanding that more.
Yeah, I think we really are in a fortunate situation here. I really, one of my heroes is Glenn Elzinga and all the things that they're doing out there at the Alder Spring Ranch. And he came to speak at a soil health conference 3 years ago in Billings. And, he's from Idaho, just west of us. But he said, you guys are so lucky here in Montana. He said, I come to speak at a soil health conference. And he said, you're maxed out. They turn people away and you've got 450 people that want to learn about soil health. And he said, most of them are farmers and ranchers I get to visit with when I'm here. He said, it's not at all like that back home where we come from. So for some reason, people are really excited about it here. I think a lot of that has to do with holistic management, ranching for profit. I think, we've got some really progressive thinkers at Montana State University, and we've got some extension agents that have really jumped into this too. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think I see a lot of young people coming into agriculture now, either through the Quivera program, as very much beginners or people that are coming home to their family ranches. And, those young people really get it. Like even my 2 boys are like, yeah, duh, Dad, you're a soil nerd and we get that, but that's obvious. Why would you not take care of the soil? Why would you not take care of the plants? And so I think it's becoming much more mainstream. And yeah, I don't think 10 or 15 years ago, there would have been near as much interest in it. So it's an exciting place to be. And I think for WSE, from our standpoint, I would just say that when Lil started this organization in 1994, she really reached out to the innovators. And once they saw that there was a place for them, like, Roger and Betsy really didn't have any friends in their neighborhood. Everybody thought they were wackos. And, but once they found a community of like-minded people to belong to, I think that's what attracted people to that message and to that excitement. And I think it's just fun to get those people together every once in a while and have them compare notes. And now a lot of their neighbors are looking over the fence going, man, I probably should have started doing that 15 years ago.
I think
Thanks.
that's true, Chris. And I think, I think,
The part about weirdos?
well, yeah, we are weirdos. There's no doubt about that. But, I think your predecessor in Lil, and 30 years ago, and she's been beating that drum for a long, long time. And, she's not shy. She's persistent. She's committed. And so I think that has an impact probably even greater than we really know. And WSC in general has a big impact in the area. And I think that really goes to the question, you know, the cherry on top that does not build the parfait. And so, and that's absolutely the truth. It does take a group and a group mindset. It's not just an island, uh, Quivera is right on that same track. I mean, building those communities is not overnight. So,
And sometimes if your local geographically community doesn't have that, you got to reach farther and find a larger community that you can draw on.
right.
And like with things like this helps that.
Thank you, Chris and Roger, Betsy. One quick question, and I think we're going to start to wrap up. Could you talk about your compensation that you get per acre or per ton of carbon, and if that is yearly, just real quick?
Yeah, for us, I forget the exact amount, but I think during the help build, we were about $3 per acre annually, so per year, based on that. And now that we've switched over the whole help build, hope build, either one works, but in either way, I think it's about $5 to $7 an acre, depending on.
What they call the vintage.
Yeah, and so that's where we're at. And there also is the carbon market. If you look at the carbon market, it's more like, I don't know what it is today, Chris, you might know, but it's in the 20s or higher, I believe, per ton is what you're going to read about if you just open a publication of some sort. But you got to realize all the testing, all the mitigation that goes on that Native is doing, as well as we have a fire come through here, and all of a sudden for 2 years there's not carbon. They have to have basically a plan. How do they make their business work?
A buffer.
So it's a buffer that's in that. And so that's combined, that's what makes that all work.
And
Yeah, the other thing I'll mention there really quick is that in your contract, it's really important to understand what your payments are based on. And there should be some formula that the company can share with you of how your payment is generated every year, or how they calculate that. So really ask hard questions about that. And in Native's contract, they've made some adjustments to it now, where they have a 3-year price reset or price discovery. And so you'll sign the first year to an amount. It needs to be specifically mentioned in the contract, but every 3 years, Native will revisit that. And if the market's changed, gone up, then they can adjust it for that amount.
thanks all.
There's a provision in our contract too, that, if the market were to really explode, there's like a buyout to where we could take advantage of that incredible market as well.
Thanks, Betsy and Roger and Chris. So now we actually want to hear from all of you. We have a question related to this topic. So I'm going to share my screen. And then into the chat, I'm putting a link. And if you go to that link, you can answer this question and we can see each other's answers in real time. So we want to know from all of you, what would you need to feel confident signing a carbon contract? I mean, we've heard about different things like data, for example, or needing to make sure it works for leased land, or not packaging it with ecosystem service credits, for example. So we got some ideas and hopefully your wheels are turning, but we'd love to hear from you. What's important to you? And this is just going to be hopefully fun for us to see each other's answers and just helpful information. So that link is working, right? Is anyone going in there to test it? I'm going to hope that link is working.
Yes, I think it is, Leah. I'm on it.
Great. So we'll give you a couple minutes to think about this. Oh yeah, here they go. What would you need to feel confident? Transparent, more farmers around me, value. Also, if you put in the same answer as someone else, it like becomes bigger. So if you see something, you're like, I want to double down on that. Collaborative, incantations, transparency again, solid carbon testing, who is buying the credits? Yep, that was brought up. The skill of the operator. Great. The parfait, I like that. There's like some poetry in today's webinar, which I appreciate. So thank you for sharing all that. And then we also have just a survey question. So I'm going to move to the next slide just to hear from you how this webinar impacted your knowledge, whether it's applicable and whether you're feeling more confident in your ability to assess carbon projects. And also I'm going to encourage, while you all are filling this out, Chris and Betsy and Roger, if you see questions in the chat that you want to answer, or if you want to drop your emails in the chat so folks can follow up with you, I'm sure folks will appreciate that, because we know we did not get to all your amazing questions and we're so sorry about that, but time does what it does. And I'll leave this up for another 30 seconds or so for you all to respond. All right, and now I'm going to move into the last question, which is, what questions remain unanswered? We only have one webinar left in this series, so I'm guessing we're not going to be able to answer all your remaining questions, but it helps us know how to build future programming. And it's just interesting to know what's on your mind after learning all of this. I know some of you have been here for probably all 3 webinars, or maybe some of you just hopped in for this one, but what's on your mind? Credits for smaller farmers and ranchers. That is on my mind too, as a small farmer myself. Comparison of carbon companies with pros, cons, and ROI. Yeah, it'd be awesome, right, if we could have more like tables that compare and contrast different companies that make it easier for producers to wade through all of that. How to retain credits from state land and BLM, absolutely. How many small farmers have to collaborate to make it work? Yes, how do we collectivize and come together to access these sorts of payments? Great. Well, thank you all. You can keep answering that one, but I'm going to switch now to the slideshow and remind folks that we have our last webinar next week. This is about emerging opportunities in carbon markets and beyond. You'll hear more about ecosystem service credits. You'll hear more about equity and access in the carbon markets. It's going to be great. We're going to hear from the National Indian Carbon Coalition and the Ecosystem Service Consortium, Market Consortium. I probably said that wrong, but you know what I'm saying. And it's going to be great. So we hope we see you here on the same Zoom link next week. And with that, we want to thank you all for being here, and especially thank our speakers, Betsy and Roger and Chris. That was awesome. I know you all probably want to learn so much more from them, so I'm sure they'd love to hear from you. Contact them, contact us with follow-up questions. And we'll see you all next week. Same time, same place. Can't wait.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank you very
Take
much.
care. Have a great day. Have a
Thank you. Thank you.